least the drilling's not as loud over here. Can't wait till this TV screen's up. There it goes. All right. So, how did your assignments go? Did you guys have problems, questions with any of that? If I can get to what I'm looking for, this would be easier. 4. There we go. No one had any issues? Awesome. It was just a screenshot, so it's not like you're submitting a catalog, so you're good there. And I should have the folder on the server for you guys. I believe I put it there last week already. So it should be there to submit those screenshots if you haven't already. Because this week we have finished our organization stuff. So while we're still going to use it in everything we do, it's just going to be a new part of our workflow as we add to it. So our goal today, yes I did, okay. Our goal today is to move forward to something new like the develop module and actually start playing and editing with our photos. I'm gonna just walk through as much as I can. Everything we do today relates to chapters 4 and 5. So it talks about global adjustments and local adjustments. And I want to make sure that we get through both of those things. I know some of this stuff is going to be a repeat because some of you are in digital editing and then some of you are in advanced photography, or you have taken it. So we've talked about camera raw and the sliders and things like that. And a lot of the stuff in here is similar. It's just a matter of where it is. So it's not necessary for me to go through every part of what every single slider is because it is pretty much the same. It's just Lightroom versus Photoshop and then some of the differences there. The local adjustments is probably where the majority of the time needs to be spent, but also the, if I can get into the develop module here, just some of the little tricks to getting to certain things and maybe quick keys to flip through and get to certain things. That's really where I want the focus to be. So that's kind of our plan, and I'll point out certain things from the chapters, but what I'm wanting you guys to do is just use those 2 chapters as a guide to find things, and even if you want to go through certain step-by-step tutorials for very specific things that I don't go through, I'll let you know which ones those are. But for the most part, chapter 4 for sure is going to be more of a review for you guys because it's just Lightroom instead of Photoshop, but it's the same things. So far, we have worked within the library module. And the library module allows us to do all that organizing, tag, all that good stuff. And now we have gone through that process and we have found the images that we want to edit. We have things we want to make look better, crop, straighten, whatever it may be. We have got that all figured out. We've gone through, made our picks or 5 stars or whatever process you've decided to go through. Now it's just a matter of taking the best of the best and making them look even better. Now to get to, does everyone have all of the, like the library, develop, map, all that stuff? Is that across the top for everyone? Because it may or may not be. There are ways to hide this. This is one thing within Lightroom that we can customize. The more workspace you have, the better. Now we have big screens, so it's pretty awesome, but if you want even more space to work on, your stuff and zoom in and see what you're looking at, we can hide some of these features, and this goes across the board no matter whether we're in library, develop, that kind of stuff. At the top here you're going to see this little arrow, and if you click that arrow it hides that, so it gives you a little bit more real estate at the top, but you can mouse over it to bring it back up. So if you want to at any time, you can add or take away that and then just mouse over it when you need it. Good morning. Now the same thing goes for the sides, these side panels. If you want to get rid of them, when you mouse over and you see the little double arrows with the line down, if you double click, that gets rid of it. And if you double click, it will also bring it back. Or if you mouse over it, it will bring it back. But you can also double click to bring it back. And that's true on either side. So just know that if you had wanted to get rid of anything, you certainly can. The other key would be to hit the tab key. And that's like Photoshop, so that's nothing out of the ordinary. If you hit tab, it hides your tools in Photoshop. If you hit tab here, it just hides the two side panels, not the top and bottom. So again, if you're just looking to hide all the extra distractions to work on stuff, that's what you would hit. All that is true no matter what module you are in. So as we move forward from the library module into develop, you can either click on up here or you hit the D for develop. That makes it a little bit easier to remember. If you hit the D key, it brings you into the develop module. I'm going to hide this just to buy as much space as possible for you guys. I usually put my coffee here and there's a microphone. I almost grabbed the microphone. So this is going to look somewhat familiar as far as this right-hand side. So in the develop module, we have a lot of similar things compared to Camera Raw. We have our histogram at the top. It tells us the RGB values of wherever our mouse is and that particular pixel that it's mousing over. All that's the same. Now one thing, you guys probably don't have all this open. I'm gonna, whoops, not what I wanted. I wanted to close this. I'm going to close a bunch of this stuff. You guys probably have most, I don't even know what the default is anymore, most of these little tabs on the right-hand side are probably closed. Or are they all open for you? No, they're all closed. Okay, so they're probably all closed except for the basic one, which is the first one. In Camera Raw, we had all the little tabs across the top. In Lightroom, it's just disclosure triangles to open and close all the similar areas. So it is very similar in that aspect, just instead of tabs, it goes down. And we can open and close every one of these individually if we would like. But I want to show you a trick because this gets a little bit lengthy as you start playing around. If you right click on any one of these disclosure triangles, you'll see here's all the ones that are available. As long as they're checked, they're visible. But it's this solo mode that I think you're going to like. You either love it or hate it. You either like just scrolling up and down to see everything to get to what you want, or you know what tab you want to go to and you don't want to scroll through all of them, you just want that one. With solo mode on, when it's checked, what that means is rather than when I open this one, it just adds to the list. When I open this one, it closes everything else. So only one is open at a time, hence the name solo mode. So if I open transform, it closes everything else. I only see transform. I go back and forth with what I like, but I tend to like solo mode a little bit more because then I don't have this lengthy list of everything open. So that's totally up to you. It's just a simple right click on any one of those tabs and then checking or unchecking solo mode. And I know there's a book page reference for it. I just have to find it. Solo mode, solo mode. Those are the that might be a tip at the end of the chapter now that I'm thinking about it. Pretty sure it might be. Maybe not. I thought it was in the Lightroom killer tricks. It's in here, I promise. I'll have to find the page. So yeah, right click, solo mode, either on or off, whatever you would like. Now, tools that we would normally use in Camera Raw used to be across the top in Camera Raw. In Lightroom, we have a set of tools, but they're right below the histogram and right above the basic tab, or where all those tabs are. So any tool that we use is going to fall in here. And you'll find some similarities as we go through it. We'll get to that shortly, but you'll see all of that as, and they all have different quick keys. But another similarity between Camera Raw and Lightroom is in the histogram. we have our clipping warnings that we can turn on and off, these little triangles up at the top. When they're turned on, that means if we have something overexposed or underexposed, is overexposed? Maybe not. I want something either way over or way under. One of these has to be way over. Well, let's make it way over. So as it becomes overexposed, you get the red clipping warnings for the highlights, and you get the blue clipping warnings for the shadows. I lost my train of thought. Let me think for a second. All these sliders in the basic tab. This is one I don't necessarily need to go through unless anyone wants me to go through any part of it. The white balance, the tone, exposure, highlight, shadow, white, black, clarity, vibrance, saturation. This is identical to Camera Raw. So this is nothing new compared to what you know from digital editing or Photo Advanced or anything you've edited in Raw before. All this is the same. The white balance tool itself is actually within the white balance sliders, whereas in Camera Raw, it's a tool up at the top, but the eyedropper is right here, and we simply click it, we get our eyedropper, we go and we target a point. Now I like this better than Camera Raw, because when we actually use the white balance tool and we mouse over, we see the surrounding pixels. And we also get our RGB values within this target area that we're selecting so that we can find a point and see the colors around it, because it does take into effect some of the surrounding colors. I can find that neutral point that should be gray and click, and then it will neutralize my image. So it will do the custom white balance and adjust the temp and the tint sliders. So this is one bonus over Camera Raw when we're editing for white balance, is just the ability of this tool in setting that target point. Now we have learned that we can import RAW files and JPEG files into Lightroom. And Lightroom is going to act exactly like Camera Raw would, whereas any image we touch, it's non-destructive. So no matter what image I put in here, it's essentially keeping that data separate from the original image. You know, like a RAW file does an XMP file, and then when we actually export it, it bakes all the adjustments within there, but it's always separate. In Lightroom, all those separate small files that tie in with the catalog and the catalog itself, that's storing all that XMP data rather than it being a separate file. So whereas as we do edits here, if we were to do this in Camera Raw, we would see that XMP file, if I can find a folder that has that. So as I edit an image, so if I edit this particular image, and then in the Finder, now I edited that one in Camera Raw in digital editing as an example, and when I edit that, it creates that XMP file. The Lightroom catalog, the purpose of that is to store that information, and some of the other subsequent files that are in that same folder, that all stores the information for that particular image. So when I'm editing in Lightroom, I don't see all those XMP files show up. They're stored within here. So that is a nice bonus. The only downfall, I guess, is that if I wanted to do something in Photoshop and I open it in the original in Camera Raw, it doesn't carry over any of my Lightroom adjustments. But I will show you later on, not this week, either next week or the following week, I can't remember when I have planned for that, how to bring it into Photoshop, edit, and bring it back to Lightroom. So we'll talk about that later on. Don't worry about that quite yet. So this panel is pretty self-explanatory. The one bonus too, as far as all these sliders, is I can do the same thing as I can in Camera Raw. And some of you may not notice, this is a newer thing that they added in. So depending on when you took digital editing, you can use the sliders to increase, decrease everything that you want, but you can also use the histogram. I love doing this because for me it's a visual thing. I realize I don't have a whole lot in the highlights, or the highlights and the white areas of my image, because my histogram contains mostly data over here, which is fine. When I look at my image, I have more dark areas. I mean, I have the sea lion, and then I have the pier and things like that, and those are all darker areas, so I should have more dark areas in my histogram than light. But what I also notice is that I do have some light areas here, and my histogram is not reflecting that I have a whole lot of that data, so I want to adjust to correct my image that way. I can simply, rather than the sliders, I can just say this part of my histogram here needs more, and I can grab and drag it left and right, and it will adjust the slider for me. So you can choose what you want. I enjoy the visual piece of it. Obviously, I don't want to spike my highlights here. I enjoy the visual aspect that I can just see and grab. I feel like I'm like moving the pixels in my histogram over to where I want them to be. Maybe I want some more, a few darker areas in here. But it is as simple as just grabbing and dragging until you get exactly what you want. But obviously the sliders will do the same thing. You are going to want to know this quick key. As you make adjustments, who likes to see the before or after? I do. I don't know if you do, but I always like to see where it started and where I'm adjusting to see if I've done too much, not enough, make that comparison. There is a way just to flip the preview on and off. However, you want to know this quick key because, to be honest, I'd have to look in the book to figure out how to turn it on and off. Is it this one? I have to turn it on and off in the book. I honestly don't even remember because I only know the quick key. It is, I'm just going to grab the keyboard and attempt to show you here. It's this little backslash below the delete key. It's not an easy key to remember at first, but once you remember it, it will be the one you use more than anything else. When you hit that backslash, that previews your before and after. So above the return key, below the delete key on the keyboard is that the little straight line or the backslash. And when you hit that key, that will show you the before and the after. I'm telling you that key will be your best friend. Out of everything in this software, you will use it the most. That and probably the grid, G and D for develop. Those are probably the ones you use more than anything else. So you definitely need to know that one. I honestly do have to look in the book to see where the before after. There's a button that you can click down here somewhere to do the before and after. I know you could do, no, that turns that on and off. No, build a smart preview. No, I don't want to. I know we can click this original photo button, but we have to have the smart previews built before we can do that. So that's, if you have smart previews, you can just click original photo below the histogram and it will flip back and forth. But there's another way of doing it. I seriously would have to look it up. Just know the quick key. I know it's in here too. It's somewhere in one of these. Previous photo, next photo, tools, view. Maybe it's this one.
You talking about the scene when you first started?
Yeah. I don't even know. There's a button that you can click.
You mean the YY when it's bottom?
That you could click too. Yes, you could do the side by side before after if you want. That you could certainly do. And now my sea lion is gone. Where's my sea lion that I started with? This one. Let's make that a pic so I can get back to that faster. Yes, you could. You could do it this way, this before after. But there's another way of reference top bottom. There's another way of just very quickly seeing. I don't want to soft proof, but there's another way of quickly seeing it with a button here, unless I have to turn it on. Grid overlay, soft proofing. Nope. Let's turn on navigate though. And let's turn on flagging. And no, not rating. Color label. There you go. But as long as you know the quick key. I'll seriously look it up. I know it's in chapter 4. I just would have to look it up to see the before after because I really don't remember. It's so weird. Okay, so one trick I want to show you, and some of you may know this from Camera Raw, but I want to point it out again because it's easy to forget, is when we're editing photos, not only do we set the white balance and we try and neutralize our image in case it's off a little bit. If you do a custom white balance, you really shouldn't have to worry about it. If you use the gray card, custom white balance, and then you bring it in, there should be really nothing to do there as far as white balance. But if you're using any of the presets, you can select a different preset from your camera if you want to, or you can use the white balance tool. We will have ways of syncing all of our settings. I will get to that later, but you can sync just like you can in Camera Raw across multiple images. Same thing with additional adjustments that you make. You can sync those across the board. So we will definitely talk about that, but we'll get through some of these developed settings first. When you set usually one of the next steps after you adjust the white balance is you want to add that contrast back in that your camera can't necessarily capture. And you can use, yes, the contrast slider to do something like that. However, you might want to find and set your white and black points within your image. And I'll give you the book reference too if you need to go back to it, but it's on page 171 in chapter 4, where he talks about setting the white and black points. So if you typically work on a PC, the key that you need to know is the Alt key. If you work on a Mac, the Option key is the key to know. But if you hold down the Alt or Option key and you slide one of those sliders, you'll see that it turns either completely black or completely white, depending on which one you're sliding. And it allows you to drag and see, when you start to see parts of your image, what that's indicating at this point is that I'm overexposing this part of my image. So what you want is you want to get to the point where you're just barely starting to see parts of your image show up in either white or one of the colors. All the colors mean, if you're wondering, is that it's indicating a certain color channel that's overexposed. So in this case, anything that shows up white, all three color channels are overexposed because I'm using the white slider. If red is showing up, it's just the red channel that's overexposed. Blue for the blue, green for the green. When you have yellow or teal or magenta, it's a combination of two color channels that are overexposed. But when it's white, it is all three. So you just want to make sure when you drag these sliders that you're just barely seeing something overexposed. Unless it is supposed to be blown out, then don't worry about it. But find that spot where something is just starting to become overexposed. And then the same thing with the black point, only it turns white in this case, and then it's the opposite. Anything that's black, all three color channels are underexposed. But other than that, the colors indications are the same thing. Now it might be okay for me to underexpose, like in this case, it's the shadows underneath the sea lion. I might want that to be completely black, and that's okay that that's showing up as clipping, because I don't necessarily want detail in it. So it might be okay that I show no detail in those areas. That's what that clipping warning is indicating. If I see the before after, it's cleaned up a bit. I could do some more to it though. So those are just a few tricks as far as setting certain points when you're adjusting. That holds true in anything that you use. This isn't just a Lightroom thing. That will be across the board. But other than that, that's pretty much it for the basic tab. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to point out when it comes to that. The clarity slider, I hope you remember what that is. Clarity is not sharpening. I will say that until I'm blue in the face. Clarity is not sharpening. Clarity is a contrast in the edges of your image. I'm going to backtrack a second here before I move to different panels. I touched on the right-hand side, but I didn't say anything about the left-hand side here. I'm going to backtrack here. In the develop module, since I forgot this part, I went straight to the sliders. We have our little navigator in this upper left corner here. By default, your image fits to the screen and whatever space you make available for it. Like if I hide this, it becomes a little bit bigger. If I click, the zoom tool is the default. So I can click to zoom into an image, and it automatically turns to a hand tool so I can grab and move around. The navigator then shows, by default, it goes from fit, which is fit in your screen, to a 1-to-1 ratio, means it's zoomed in at 100%. I can change what I want my default zoom to be. It just automatically zooms to 100. It assumes that's what you want. But you might want to go closer in some instances. Don't really know how often you would use that, but you never know when you need it. So just know that next to the navigator here, this tab, we have fit, fill, 1-to-1, 3-to-1, which would be 300%, and then this drop down here with other options. So I do have the option of zooming in more. I have 400%. We do have some ridiculous options available where we can zoom out too, to even less than fill or 100%. So it's basically a 1/16 of the overall photo. But you can change this if you would like. This 1-to-1 will always stay. It's the secondary zoom in or zoom out that you can change. Whatever one is checked on this list is the next default that shows up. So I can change this to be whatever I want. But 1-to-1 is always the default. Fill just simply fills your screen so that you don't see any gray on the sides. And then fit will do, come on thing, go away. And then fit will fit the whole image within the screen. So you have that option. And then when you do zoom in, you can not only use the mouse here. Some people, I just realized the amount of drool coming off of this thing, that's gross. You can grab the box here and move it to wherever you want if you prefer. I only know a few people that prefer to do that. But this allows you to move that navigator to certain areas if you're trying to find a certain thing. Otherwise, the hand tool will allow you just grab and move that around yourself. Totally up to you. The other thing you're going to see on the left-hand side is you're going to see presets, which we're not going to talk about quite yet. That comes later. But that allows us to save certain settings or effects that we create to be able to apply to different images and import ones that you can purchase or maybe download some for free, that kind of stuff. The snapshots is basically like a history snapshot in Photoshop where you can take a snapshot of a certain state and then recall that state later on. So if I take a snapshot of this adjustment and then I do something weird and quirky, I can take another snapshot and then I can go back and view those different snapshots at those different history states. So that we touch on a little bit, not a whole lot, but we can certainly come back to that one. The other one you might enjoy is the history palette, only you have to get used to the fact that it is reversed compared to Photoshop. In Photoshop, the history palette, the very bottom, the very last line is the most recent state, and then you have to click up to go backwards in history. In Lightroom, it's completely backwards. The one at the top is the most recent. The one at the bottom is the beginning. But we do have quite a bit of history that we can go back to. The other thing that I like is that it saves our history. So that's totally different compared to Photoshop. If I quit Lightroom right now, I'm going to skip at the moment. If I quit Lightroom, come back a different day, and then I reopen Lightroom, my history will still be there. It's part of the metadata that it saves. So it opens right back to this image, and I still have all the history of every step I've ever done. So unlike Photoshop, when you close it and open it, your history is gone. Lightroom saves your history for all eternity. And I like that because you never know when you have to go back 1 or 2 steps because you don't like what you've done. So know that that is always there. You have unlimited undos too, so Command Z as often as you want. You can certainly do that at any time also. The other thing you see here is you will always have access to your collections. Even though we're not in the library module, I can stay in the develop module and switch back and forth between different collections or albums of images. That will always be available to you. If you need to see other things like your most recent import or the file folders for where images are stored, you have to go back to the library module. Collections is the only thing from library that carries over. Okay, so now I covered that. I didn't forget. Sorry, I had to backtrack a little bit. Okay, left panel, right panel, basic module. We've gotten through all of that. All the rest of these may be a bit similar and things that you are used to. I just want to make sure there's nothing else in chapter 4 here before I start going through these that I wanted to point out. Nope, okay. So I'm going to go into the tone curve. Tone curve is just like it is in Camera Raw. This is essentially the curves panel in Lightroom. We have several different options as far as how we work with this tone curve. What's really cool about this versus Camera Raw and Photoshop is that it is more visual. When I mouse over it, it not only tells me what slider I'll be sliding by grabbing and dragging certain points, visually it shows me that the point that I'm going to click and drag, here's how the curve is going to be manipulated based on that. So those light gray areas show you how that curve is going to change. If you're not comfortable with curves, don't worry about it. We will work with it a bit more. Curves does take a bit to understand and to truly figure out what you're doing with it. So it does take a little bit of time, but if you are used to curves, you will like the tone curve panel. If you're used to curves, how Photoshop does it, why are we getting a new door in the studio? What the heck? Did he take the old door down? He did. Why are we getting a new door? Oh my gosh. Okay. Sorry. Squirrel. I just don't understand. They better put the same lock back on it though. So if you're used to just putting a point on your curve and then clicking and dragging it however you want, this might drive you nuts because you have the 4 sliders and you have, and just as a refresher from Camera Raw, these sliders indicate just certain areas of the curve for you to work with. And these points right here, so essentially at this point it's like working with levels, but then these points here let you take it a step further. These are our quarter points. So we have 0, which is completely black, 25, which is the first quarter point, 50, which is 50% halfway, that are midpoint, 75, which is that highlight side, and then 100%, or 255 if you're used to the histogram and levels, that would be the whitest point. But what we can do is these nodules right here allow us to click and drag and move where the curve moves. So if I'm looking at my histogram, which is shadowed in the background right here, and I say I want to affect the shadows, but right here is not what I need to affect. I need to move it right here. It's this spike here that I need to do something with. I can click and drag that quarter point to a different spot. That way when I move that part, it's moving it based off of where this is. So it finds that XY coordinate on the curve and it puts that point right at that spot. So it finds here, and when I'm dragging the dark slider, it puts the point right there and it's dragging it off of where I moved that spot to. So I moved it from 25 to 20. Now it's moving it based off of that. Oops, I need to click here. Keep that one up. This one down. So it allows me to manipulate the curve just a little bit more than I would with the like levels in Photoshop, if that's what you're used to. That's just right off the bat. No, I'm just gonna leave this linear for now. I'll come back to that one. So if you're used to curves as it is in Photoshop and you want to manipulate it through Lightroom that way, this little button on the bottom right, which indicates more of a point curve rather than a parametric, which is what we're using right now. If I click on that, you'll see those sliders disappear, and now I'm just left with my curve. Now I can click and move these points as I'm used to doing in curves in Photoshop. So for those that are a little bit more of a control freak like me when it comes to editing, you will like this point curve more. And let me, oh crud, undo, bring it back. This is what I have to remember here. There's a way to do this. No, keeps deleting my image. In Photoshop, if we don't like a point that we take off, we simply click and drag it off and it goes away. We can't do that in Lightroom. That's one thing I don't like. You have to, I know you can right click and delete that point, but I know there's a quick key for it and I can't remember what that is at the moment. So any point that you put in, if you want to take it off, yes, in Photoshop you click and drag it off and it deletes it, but in Lightroom you can't do that, and you can't highlight it to select it and hit the delete key because it deletes your image. You have to right click and delete the control point and then start all over. I know there's another way of doing it and I can't remember the quick key. I usually just right click, but I know that there's a key to get rid of it. So either way, you can click to put a point, drag it wherever you want, put as many of these as you need to do whatever it is that you need to do. You can grab any of these anchor points at the side here and move them in and out, should you want to. And then you can also work with the RGB channel, like the luminance as a whole, or you can work with individual color channels. So I could select to go into the red channel and say, I need to add red to this image, which I don't, but let's just pretend that I need to. I think my mouse is getting screwed up because I'm zoomed in here, because it's not doing what I want it to do. Oh, I want to take out some of the reds and the highlights. So we'll talk about this curve just a little bit more, but just know you can go into individual color channels to play with your image. I want to add some magenta. This is not looking like what I want at all, but that's okay. You can see how you can manipulate each one individually. Now, one thing, hey, is it working now? Nope. How many of you use curves quite a bit in Photoshop? Not really? A little bit?
I do.
Do you, when you set points, do you use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move those points? Okay, then I won't worry about it, but in Photoshop you can. In Photoshop, when you have a point selected, you can use the up and down and left right arrow keys to small incrementally move that over to where you want it to be. In Lightroom, I have yet to find a way that you can, and it bothers me to no end. So I can't fully color correct in Lightroom like I should be able to. I have to take it to Photoshop. So I'm trying to find how I can select one of these control points that I add and then use the arrow keys to move it. There's got to be a way. There's no way there's not a way. I just have to be missing it. So for those that use curves, I'm going to search for that because that's a very, very helpful tool to be able to use. Now, at any point, you might be working in one of these tabs and you can't, and then you want to see what it looks like before that particular adjustment and after, not necessarily the backslash that does the original photo and then all of your adjustments. You might want to look at just that particular adjustment that you made. In Lightroom, I call them light switches. But you'll see next to all of these adjustments, you'll see this little on-off switch is really what it is. So you can turn on and off a particular adjustment either to preview or just to simply turn it off and not enable it at that moment. So you can turn it off to see, here's what it looks like before and after my tone curve adjustment. And you'll see that down for all of these. The only one you can't necessarily do it to is the basic panel. That you would need to do the preview with the backslash for to see the original photo versus the adjustments. So any one of these you can turn on and off at any time to see what adjustments you have made. I need to take it out of the color channels because that's going to drive me nuts. And I did green. But I also moved that. There we go. Now I can reset any one of these at any point too if I don't like what I have done. Where is it? Come on. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on how I have to reset these. I thought I could just right click on it. Oh no. I know there's a reset button at the bottom, but that's not what I want. I don't want to reset the whole thing. You can reset your image at any point from all of your adjustments by hitting the reset button in the bottom right-hand corner of this right panel. But you can do individual ones. Why can't I? I know I can do it in the adjustment tab. There's an actual reset button. Am I missing it? I know I can do this.
No. In the box.
Right click and, oh, within the box?
Yeah.
Flatten curve.
No. Inside the graph.
In the graph? It does flatten. Oh, flatten would just, oh, flatten's
Oh,
resetting it
says-
from start.
I clicked on it and then it went, did it all.
You're right. Yeah, that's
mine
right.
says reset regions as a top
Yeah, why
choice.
didn't yours do it?
Is it because I'm in here?
There you go.
Oh, I'm in the point curve. Okay, so if I'm in the point curve and I right click, I can flatten and that will neutralize it. If I'm in here, reset regions, I can do it that way. Reset point, oh, here's reset my point curve. That's weird, it's different in both. It shouldn't be that way. That's strange.
I just trying to figure out how you got to the colors and then I closed it down and did it.
Oh, there's some reset buttons in here. I'm missing it. I'm missing adding mega contrast. Nope, that's the on-off switch. There's one way to reset just that particular one without hitting the reset button at the bottom. If I do, well, let me try this. Okay, let me go back in here. If I did previous, but that takes away that. That's not what I want because previous goes pretty much all the way back here to the beginning of my previous snapshot or my previous state, which would be my original. So that's not what I want. I mean, I could just turn it off, but that obviously doesn't reset it. Well, that's interesting. Let me try. Okay, so here's another thing I wanted to show you with the tone curve. I was wondering if that would enable what I already have existing. Some of the tools have additional, I don't want to call them additional tools, but essentially it's like a tool within the tool itself. This particular one has, the tone curve has this adjustment tool. Let me turn it off for a second here. When you mouse over it, you see the little target symbol basically, but basically it gives you a tool that you can take over to the photo, and if you're unsure where that part of the photo falls on your adjustment curve, I can enable this tool so that when I go over here, now the trick is when you're looking at this tool, it's the crosshairs that I need to pay attention to, not the target circle with the up down arrow. The crosshairs are the part of the image I want to adjust. So if you simply mouse over it, you'll see in your tone curve it starts to show certain points, and it shows it circle in black so that you know that's the one it's looking at. So if I say, oh, this padding or the pier itself I need to do some adjustments to, but I don't know where it falls on the curve, I can simply go over, click, and drag up and down, and it adds that point in. Now I have a ton of other points, so it's kind of messing it up here. Let's just take that out, start all over. So I can say, I want the pier, I want that to be darker. I want the highlights in the pier to be a bit lighter. Come on, go on. Oh, it's not moving it much. I want some of these mid-tone areas for him to be a bit lighter. It's not the fact that I'm zoomed in is screwing it up here. There we go. It is touchy, I'll tell you that. It depends on the mouse too. These mice are kind of, I don't know, they kind of drive me nuts when it comes to doing this. If they're not perfectly clean on the bottom, it doesn't recognize it sliding smoothly. It's kind of a rough slide, but it will at least set those points on your tone curve to make it a little bit easier to do those adjustments. Some of the detail here. Oh my gosh, my mouse I think is losing its mind. It does not go to the right. Go to the right. And the more I do it, the less it wants to. I gotta clean the bottom of this mouse off. Oh my gosh, seriously, it's driving me nuts. Give me my Wacom tablet, I'm done. There we go, now it's working. Okay, so we can adjust those curves by selecting that tool here. It's just a matter of activating it or deactivating it when you don't want it anymore. I can still move within my curve, but then I can move up and down and pick certain points within my image to make it look exactly how I want it to look. Actually looked better before the adjustment, but that's okay. I don't think I have this Wacom set up correctly. No, I don't. There we go. So that's pretty much everything for the tone curve. It's a matter of, do you want the sliders, the parametric side of it, or do you want the point curve, which is this bottom point right here? It's completely up to you. So either one is available. So just moving down and talking about some of these. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory, and I know that you guys have used them before, but the next tab is just like in Camera Raw, that HSL, the hue, the saturation, and the luminance. And then you'll also see it says color and black and white. This is like a 3-in-1 is basically what it is. The sliders are all the same. The difference between the HSL and the color, they are the exact same thing. It's just the HSL section, that first one, the hue, the saturation, and the luminance are each in separate tabs. And you get all 8 color sliders that you can work with in each tab individually. You do have the option for the all button, and the all button makes this essentially the color tab, which I'll get to in a second here, so that you can adjust the hue, the saturation, luminance all at once versus having to go to each tab. I prefer that because sometimes I'm like, oh, I adjust the red, and now the red, I don't really have a whole lot of red here, let's do blue. I adjusted the blue and it's where I want it to be, but now the saturation's too much, so then I would have to go to the saturation tab, and then I would have to either saturate or desaturate it. So I'd have to flip between all the tabs. So I like using the all because they're all there. But what you'll find, and again, it's a preference, what you'll find is that color is that all only. It's here's the red, the hue, saturation, and luminance for just the red. Here's the blue, the hue, saturation, and luminance for just the blue. And you'll see that the settings that I did in the HSL section are identical. They mimic what's showing up here. So no matter what you do between the two of them, they're the same thing. It's just visually whatever one works better for you is all it is. And we do have the all option here too in color. Only again, unlike the other one where you see all the colors for the hue, it's the red, hue, saturation, luminance, orange, hue, saturation, luminance. That's the difference. So it is a matter of preference. If I use the HSL, I use it under all. If I use the color, I don't always use it under all. I actually just do individual colors because then I don't have that list. I prefer to use the color over HSL because if I'm adjusting the yellow and the color in the yellow, I'm usually adjusting the saturation and the luminance at the same time. But one bonus to the HSL is I have that little point, that little target point, just like I did in the tone curve. So that if I need to adjust a color, but I don't know exactly what color it is, I can simply click that, go over to my image, and then as I click and drag, it moves not just one color tone, but any color tone related to it to change the color. So in this case, it's moving the orange and the yellow at the same time. And it's adjusting the color of the pier. So if I find it needs to be a bit cooler of a tone, like it was maybe a more greenish tone than it was a reddish tone, I can cool it down and just grab and drag and adjust the color that way. I can drag the color of the pier if I want to. So that is one benefit of the HSL slider over color, is that I have that ability. If I know I need to change the color, I choose that. If I know I need to change the overall saturation, I choose that. And it works with the sliders, or the colors and the sliders that correlate with that. So that is a definite bonus. Color does not have that. Let's see if I could, nope, I can't, okay. And then the black and white tab is exactly what you think it is. It will change your image to black and white, just like in Photoshop with the black and white adjustment tool, or with the, in Camera Raw with the black and white, the HSL and the black and grayscale tab. In that plugin, you have 8 sliders to work with. It will always automatically adjust the image based on what it sees fit for that particular image. So you'll notice these sliders are not consistent every time you choose it. It does an auto setting, but you can at any time change that. Add more red, take away red, whatever it is to make it the black and white that you want. And again, you have the little target point so that you can click and drag and work with certain colors on certain parts of the image to either lighten or darken whatever it is you want to do. Does that make sense so far? I know some of this, you guys know all this already, so it's not, it's like get to something I don't know yet. I'm gonna go back to color. I don't want it in black and white. All right, that's that one. You guys know split toning? Have you done split toning on an image before? We talk about it digital editing, but I don't really show much with it because I know only certain people like to do split toning, not too many people. Anyone ever do that? No? Okay. Split toning is cool. It is like, let me turn this image black and white. This will make a little bit more sense here. How did I get black and white mix? And only half my things. Okay, no, they're all there. That was weird. That was very strange. Okay, let's make this a black and white. I'm gonna split tone. It's easier to visualize split toning when you see it in black and white, but you can do this with a color image. Basically, split toning allows you to pick, when you have a, let's just talk about it in terms of black and white. When you have a black and white image, white is the highlight color, black is the shadow color, and then it's all the variations of shades of gray in between those two. Split toning allows you to choose 2 colors that are different than black and white and basically have variations of shades of color from one end to the other. So I could choose a different highlight color and a shadow color and split tone my image. So I could choose, let's say I want blue to be my highlight, and I'm just sliding the hue slider here. I'm guessing at this point because it's doing nothing yet. And I'm gonna do magenta for the other end. Let's kind of go halfway in between there. I can also pick a certain color if I want to. I'm using the slider here, but I can click this little box and pick a very specific color if I would like. And this is a little bit faster than using the sliders, to be honest, because if I use the slider, I have to slide to a color I want and then slide to the saturation that I want. That's why you didn't see anything at first when I was sliding to whatever color, because I didn't increase my saturation. But you can choose a color here. It's probably quicker. So I can choose whatever color I want for the highlight, and I can choose whatever color I want for the shadow, and whatever saturation that I want for it. And then the balance is what does the split toning. It's splitting the colors and how much highlight color there is versus how much shadow color. So if I move it to the left, it's gonna increase the amount of color it applies on the shadow side up through the midtones. And if I move it to the right, it's gonna increase the highlight side into the shadow side. So you're gonna see more differences there. Usually when we split tone, it's pretty mellow as far as a color difference. I gotta rebalance this. My colors are too similar. What did I do? I didn't mean to do that. So you can see rather than grayscale, it's now a cyan and a magenta color, and it's blending those two. So it's like a grayscale of those two images, essentially, is what it is. So that's what split toning does. Now I can do this on a color image if I want to. Anytime you want to reset this, honestly, just take the saturation down. I can do this to a color image, and that's cool for effects like a vintage effect, or I'm trying to think. I can't think of the title of it, like a toy camera effect. You can use that for it if you want. So if I bring this back to color here, whoops, didn't need to do that. If I bring this back to color and go to split toning, I can actually split tone the color image if I want. And it just creates different effects for it. So these are awesome for those type of vintage effects, old school effects on images, film effects on images. Split toning is great for that because you choose what that highlight shadow color would be, which is true to older aged photos, and then you apply that to this photo. See, I should be able to click here and reset. Anytime you want to reset a slider anywhere in Lightroom, it is the same as Camera Raw. Double click. You simply double click the slider and it sets it back to the default or 0. So if that's something you didn't know from Camera Raw, it's true there and it's true here. Just simply double click the slider. Now I'm afraid to do this, but I'm going to try it. No, it doesn't do it here. Okay. Wow. I found it. Here it is, the reset. There's a quick key in Camera Raw to reset all of them, but, oh, I should have remembered that. Why didn't I remember that? In any tool that you use in Photoshop, I don't know if, like if you're in a filter, and you've done all these weird adjustments and you don't like it and you want to reset it, you don't have to hit the cancel key. If you hold down the option key, it turns cancel to reset, and then you click the reset button and it starts you from scratch. Yeah, I should have known. That's true here too. When I hold down the, like on my, here, let me do this. When I hold down my option key or the alt key on a PC, it changes, it says highlights, and it changes it to reset highlights. And if I click that, it resets it. There it is. I knew it was somewhere. I can't believe I could remember that one. Hold on the option key and it will change that. So same thing with any of these sliders. Reset hue, reset saturation. It will allow you to reset and then just click. So hold down the option or alt key, and then whatever says reset, that's what you click on. I knew it wasn't that hard. I haven't had enough of my coffee today. The detail slider is the next one. This is where you're going to find your sharpening, your noise reduction, everything you're used to. So that is nothing out of the ordinary. I know he has a few little sections within these 2 chapters. Actually, no, I think that's in chapter 6, or I mean 7. I think I'm lying to you. Where he does talk about sharpening, noise reduction, and just some basic settings for it. He doesn't do that quite yet, but I just want to make sure I'm not skipping over it because chapter 5 is our local adjustments. No, it's going to be in chapter 7. Once we start getting to our special effects and stuff like that, that's when we're going to go through it a little bit more. But you can play with it. If you're used to sharpening and noise reduction, you already know how to do all of this stuff. When we get to that part within our special effects in those chapters, he does have some good guidelines as far as like basic settings that you can try. So you could always jump ahead to that part if you really needed to at this point. But otherwise, the detail tab is just like the detail tab in Camera Raw. You can set this target point if you're trying to, if you want to view your image overall to see how sharpening affects it, but you also need to see a portion of the image and the detail and the sharpening there. You can use this little target point and select a different part of the image to see the detail. It does it at 100% by default. I'm trying to get a very certain, there we go. So that as you sharpen, you can see it at 100% and how the detail's affecting it while still looking at the full image and how it looks overall. So this navigation window here is awesome, but know you've got that little target point so you can navigate to a different part of your image to see the detail. It's just like the other tools where you click on it and move it. I'm not going to go through lens correction quite yet, but I know some of you just talked about it in digital editing and digital editing advanced. So there is a whole lens correction thing, and it is the same. Select the lens that was used. It applies the profile that's attached to it to adjust for minor distortions and stuff that typically happen with that particular lens. Removing the chromatic aberration or aberration, depending on how you say it. You do have certain options here. Again, these are things we're going to come back to, so I'm not going to cover it too much, but you might already know about it from Camera Raw. We talked about it yesterday. So if you're in those classes, we did it yesterday. Actually, in both editing and editing advanced yesterday. So you will see that we have the default, which is the profile, which just automatically applies it. And we have the manual tab, which gives us a little bit more control over some of these areas. But again, this is stuff we will come back to. The transform is a newer one. You should all have a version where this is available, but this basically allows you to work with distortions or different perspectives that are maybe off from where, like if you're standing and you can't quite get to the height that you need to shoot something straight on, you're slightly off perspective. This is where you can correct that if you would like to. So I can do the stretching of my image, I can rotate the image, I can do my offset black and white, my horizontal. This one's pretty straight on, so it doesn't really look like much. But I can do any adjusting to fix any of that transformation here. We will come back to this guided tool to draw the guides. This is not the best image to do that. Actually, let me see if I can. I don't want this one to be straight though. Yeah, I was going to say that's not going to work on this image. There you go. We will do this on different images when we get later on in the chapter, or I mean in the book, a couple chapters from now. So if you need to adjust distortion and stuff like that, transform is what you might want to use. The effects panel, we are going to come back to also what you probably would use now more than anything. There's a vignetting tool in here, but the dehaze tool is everyone's favorite tool. At one point they took this away. People threw a fit. This is awesome for, like, here's an example. This is not the best image, but I'll just use it. So especially if you have landscapes and stuff, when you have things at a distance, you have a little bit of a haze just because of the distance and depending on the air quality, stuff like that. This dehaze tool is the most amazing tool for removing that. This is kind of everybody's favorite tool when they do landscape photography or things at a distance. Everyone loves that tool. And this is bothering me. I need to adjust this. So dehaze you will probably love, but that's where it is. It falls under the effects. I'm not going to talk about camera calibration yet. That's a completely different thing too. So we'll come back to that. So within the develop module, I know I just quickly ran through it, but I don't want to repeat too much where you guys already know that stuff. It's just here's where it is in Lightroom. That's simply all there is to it. Does anyone have a question at this point with any of those sliders where maybe you're not as familiar with it as you are hoping and you want me to go through any part of those individually to understand? No, you guys are really quiet today. The next, like chapter 4 through pretty much 8, pretty sure it's 8, yeah, maybe even 9, have to do, no, through 8. Chapters 4 through 8 have to do all with the develop module. So this is not the only time we're going to talk about it. We're going to spend the majority of our time here for the semester. I mean, because that's what you do. You bring it into Lightroom not just to organize, but to edit your photos. So we are going to spend quite a bit of time here. So like chapter 5, the next one I'm going to jump into, talks about more localized adjustments, and I'll explain the difference shortly. And then when we get into chapter 6, we don't even, all right, am I thinking 7? It's either 6 or 7. Oh yeah, chapter 7 we don't do because chapter 7 talks about the mobile app. But chapter 6, we start talking about more specific edits. We talk about special effects in one of the other chapters in chapter 7 and 8. Special effects are fixing common problems. So we're going to use the develop module and talk about settings to try when you're trying to fix a certain problem. So know that even though I just ran through it at this point, it's more so here's where it is for those that are used to it or familiar with those adjustments. We'll talk about fixing some of those things as we go along. Okay. So you're good so far? All right. If you're good so far, what I'm going to do is start talking about chapter 5, which I think is where our time is better spent, and it's talking about local adjustments. How many of you used the adjustment brush in Camera Raw before? No, maybe a little bit? Okay. So maybe about half. This is very similar to that, some of these local adjustments, but we do have some other options, some other controls. I think we have equally as much control, maybe even a little bit more control in Lightroom versus Photoshop. When we talk about adjustments, we have two things. We have global adjustments and local. So a global adjustment basically means that it applies to the whole image. It's globally. So that would be anything that we just talked about, the basic tab, the tone curve, the HSL, color, black and white, all of that. It applies to the entire image. When we talk about local adjustments, we're talking about this is affecting one part of the image, and we're selecting what part of the image that this affects. So that's what we're going to talk about here. Local adjustments allow us to do a lot of things that we probably would normally do in Photoshop, but without having to take it there. It speeds up your workflow. I really believe it speeds up your workflow if you can do more of it in Lightroom than in Photoshop. So these local adjustments really do give you the power to edit and adjust these images that way. Now, one of the first things I want to show you is dodging and burning. You're used to using the dodge and burn tool in Photoshop, maybe. You might find different ways of doing it. We talk about in all those in digital editing and things like that, different ways to dodge and burn without using those tools to maybe be a more accurate representation of what you're trying to do, an effect of what you're trying to do for that particular image. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to use one of the tools that are across here. When we look at adjustments and localize adjustments, these last three tools to the right are the ones that we want to pay attention to. So the one on the far right is the one you probably use the most, and that's the adjustment brush. That's very much like the adjustment brush in Camera Raw. My Wacom tablet won't let me mouse and stay there. So the adjustment brush, that's the same quick key as Raw. So if you use Camera Raw, the quick key is K. It's the same in Lightroom. It makes it easier not to have to remember the extra quick keys. So the adjustment brush is K. I don't have a magical way to remember that one. I always like to think of weird, ridiculous ways to remember things. That's how I operate. But I got nothing for that one. You just have to memorize it. If anyone thinks of a cool, ridiculous way to remember K for the adjustment brush, please be my guest and share it. But when we use this adjustment brush tool, you'll see that on this right panel, the other tools pretty much are disabled. They're hiding down here. And then we have a whole new set of sliders that become available. We have very similar things to the basic tab. We have our exposures, our highlight, shadow, tint, that kind of stuff, our overall white balance things. Everything in the basic tab, but then we have a few extra options here. We do have sharpness, noise, moire pattern for removing moire patterns. That's a nice tool. It's kind of odd that there isn't a slider for that outside of the adjustment brush, but your defringe and chromatic abrasion tool, that is somewhat similar. But then we also have our defringe, which is more specific to the chromatic abrasion. We have a color tool, which we'll come to not quite yet. And then we have the ability to do different brush sizes, because when we use the adjustment brush, we have to choose the size of the brush, the feathering of the brush, just like we would in Photoshop. All that's the same. The one nice thing about the adjustment brush, and I appreciate this more in here than in Adobe Camera Raw, is that we have the option to basically save two different brush presets. We have an A and a B, and we have an erase. So erase is great to, obviously, if we brush something and we brush too far, rather than undo and start all over, we can simply choose the eraser brush, and then we can brush over those parts of our image that we accidentally did and we don't want it. We have to take it out. But the ability to save an A and B brush is kind of a cool thing, because sometimes you need a bigger brush with feathering, sometimes you need a tiny brush with less feathering, and by default that's the way it's set up, but you can feel free to change this however you want. It's just whatever brush you have selected, A or B, whatever your last settings are, that's what it uses. So for brush A, it's typically a brush that's a little bit larger with a lot of feathering, and the B brush is always a bit smaller with less feathering. Again, change it to whatever you want it to be. Whatever the last setting is for that one is how it's going to stay and live. But the quick keys are the same compared to Photoshop. Your bracket key will increase, the right bracket will increase, the left bracket will decrease. All of that's the same. So it is nice to be able to adjust that on the fly. The feathering, do you guys know the quick key for feathering in Photoshop? Ooh. So if you want to increase and decrease brush side, it's the bracket. If you want to increase and decrease feathering, it's shift and the brackets. The right bracket will increase the feathering while holding down the shift key. The left one will decrease the feathering. Those are identical across the board. Again, I love when quick keys are the same across multiple programs because life is easier. So it is in fact the same. So right bracket, left bracket, shift, right or left bracket will do the feathering. Then we can set these to be whatever we want it to be. This maybe I'll go back to this image. It'll probably be a bit easier. So let's say I want to darken the pier in the water because I don't want that to be as obvious. I want the focus to be drawn up here. So darkening is probably a good option here. So I might decrease my exposure a bit and then just start simply brushing. And then it will brush over those parts of my image. There we go. And I can always go back and change my adjustments. I usually just pick a setting, brush, and then change it until it looks like I want it to look. Go ahead.
Can you make it look almost like bokeh effect down there, or is it just?
I could decrease the clarity if I wanted to.
Okay.
I could probably decrease the sharpness too. Yeah, the sharpness would help. It would more so blur than a
blur.
bokeh effect. Yeah. But I could
It's
overlay
just a brush.
something.
It's not like a.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just doing a local adjustment to a certain area of my image. If maybe I want the top darkened a little bit too, the cool thing is as I brush, it just continues to add to, essentially it's a mask is what it is. And it will just keep adding to what I started until I tell it to do something differently. Not that this is what I want here.
This is awesome. I never knew you could do this.
This is great, and this is true in Camera Raw too. We haven't quite talked too much about it in that class, but we will next week. We'll talk about the adjustment brush. So Camera Raw has the adjustment brush, Lightroom does too. Now at any time I can make adjustments to this and it will change that particular one. And again, to reset anything, you simply double click and then it updates your adjustment and what you have. If you want to see what you've masked over, sometimes it's hard to tell if you've caught everything. If you simply mouse over, this is what I wish Camera Raw would have. If you simply mouse over this little pinpoint is where you first clicked. This just indicates where you started. That's all that means. This point right here, when you mouse over, it shows you the mask. So if you missed something, like I missed some over here and over here, I can go back and I can brush that in and I can catch all of those spots. Adobe Camera Raw does not let you do that. You have to physically turn on the mask. Now I brushed over, my feathering was pretty high, so it actually went over the sea lion itself, and I don't want it on the sea lion. I can brush it out by using the erase if I would like to. And maybe in this case, less of a feathering. I can brush off of it. Now if you're a person that likes to actually see the mask all the time so you know where you're brushing rather than mouse over it, because I can see I'm missing certain areas here, let me zoom in here. Come on. Oh, and since we have a magic mouse, I accidentally did this, but I forgot. Since we have the magic mice in here, if you brush your finger up and down, that also increases and decreases your brush size by moving your finger up and down, just so you know. And I think, no, left to right does it also. So yeah, up, down, left, right. Oh my gosh. Anyone have little kids who watch PBS? Do they watch Odd Squad? Okay.
No.
There's a song called Up, Down, Left, Right. There's a song called Up, Down, Left, Right. So every time I say it, I start singing the song in my head. Oh my gosh. So yeah, so moving your mouse or your finger on your mouse up or down will increase, decrease brush size. But you can select this erase brush if you want. And then I want the feathering down a little bit. And then I can be a little bit, bless you, a little bit more particular with what I'm erasing. So the only thing I don't like, and there's probably a way around this, I just haven't found it yet, is that if I zoom in to do anything with my brush, yes, my space bar will give me my hand tools so that I can, bless you, so that I can kind of move this around a little bit and get across my image. The only problem is, unlike when I'm in the develop module in itself, when I click, it doesn't zoom back out. I have to actually go to the navigator to fit it back into the window. That's the only downfall.
That's weird.
But there's probably a key somewhere. I'm sure there is because it's Adobe. Why wouldn't there be a key somewhere to actually click a button and it zooms back out for you? I'm sure it's there. Again, another thing I'll have to Google later. So here's one thing, as I'm looking at this particular image, if I mouse over my pinpoint so I can see where I've masked, I'm gonna pretend that I like this, but I like how dark it is at the bottom, but the top is too dark. And I have it on the same mask right now, and I would rather darken that top part just a little bit, not quite as much as I've done at the bottom, but because I've brushed it all as one, whatever I do, it's gonna adjust all those parts. So what I'm gonna do momentarily is I'm actually going to just erase what I did at the top. I'm just gonna use the eraser brush so that truly the adjustment I've made is only the bottom of the pier. I want to adjust the top, but not quite as dark. So I'm going to go over to my adjustment brush here, and you see I have the option for new. If I click the new button, it will disable my original pin, it will turn it gray. And then I will get a new point basically, and now I can click, and now I can paint another mask. So I can do as many of these as I would like. I just have to hit new every time I want to create a new point. So now I have 2 points. I have one down here that I can still mouse over and see the mask. And I have one here, and since it has the dark circle in the middle, that's the one that's active. This one now I can adjust a little bit differently and independently of the other one. So I want it dark, but not quite as dark. Maybe a little bit more in the shadows and the blacks. So now this one's just a little bit different than the other one. Here's one mask and here's the other. The other cool thing is I can go back and edit any one of these individually at any point. I simply just have to click on the pin of the one I want to edit. So it disables the other one and activates that one. And you'll see your adjustment slider adjust to whatever you did for that particular one. And then you can simply go ahead and do what you want to do to that one. Like this one, I really do want to not affect this part of the pier here. Oops. Dang. There we go. In a nutshell, that's the adjustment brush. As far as functioning with it, there are certain instances, and actually this is one thing different about the adjustment brush. If you want to turn on and off just the adjustment that you've done, it's not at the top like the other ones are, the other panels, it's at the bottom. That's the only one that's weird. The little light switch is down here so that you can turn that on and off and see what you've done. The other ones are at the top, but because this doesn't have like a panel title, it's at the bottom. So you just have to know to go to it. Now the other thing that may come in handy in certain instances, and I wonder if I should I should have something. I'm going to go back to the library module quick so I can find what I want. Let's try this. Would this work? It's not very focused. Let's try this one. One thing I can do with the adjustment brush is I can use what's called the auto mask tool. I'm going to hit D to go back into develop. I can use the auto mask tool, and what that does is it's basically, here, let me brush with it. It'll probably make more sense this way. I'm going to reset all of these to 0. If you want to reset all the adjustment sliders to 0, like if you have a bunch all over the place, if you hold down just like the reset when we hold down the option or the alt key, the effect up at the top left changes to reset, and when you click it resets all the sliders. You can, yes, double click any slider to reset to 0, but holding down this key and clicking reset up here will let you reset all those sliders there, just for the adjustment brush, not the whole thing. So I want to like saturate this a little bit more. And you know one thing that bothers me about the adjustment brush? You have the saturation slider, but not the vibrance. I wish we had the vibrance slider because I prefer that over saturation, but we don't. We do have dehaze, which I appreciate. However, I wish we had the vibrance slider. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, with the brush that I have selected, I'm going to down here click this auto mask button. And what it's going to do is, as I'm brushing the little crosshair in the middle for my brush, whatever pixel or color that it's using, it's going to find pixels that are similar and then apply that brush to those areas. But areas that are drastically different, like the green of the cactus in the background, it's not going to brush over that part. So it's automatically recognizing similar pixels to what I have in the middle of my brush, and it's going to only apply it there and find those areas of contrast in different colors and eliminate that from it. So if I have a larger brush here and I click in the yellow, you'll see it's not brushing onto the green at all unless I move my crosshairs over to the green, then it will. But otherwise, this auto mask is awesome, and I think this does a better job than Photoshop's auto mask, to be honest. Photoshop sometimes has that, and some of you have done this, so you know this, where, here, let me just get all parts of it here. Apparently I can't talk and brush at the same time. There we go. Where it will kind of have like grainy effects to it, almost like pixelated effects, where it's being very, very particular about the color that it's selecting that's in the crosshairs, where I think in Lightroom it's a little bit more smoother of a mask, if that makes any sense. I do like the auto mask much better here. Now I want to take it out of here because that's driving me nuts. I need to auto mask that too. But you can see that it recognized all of the edges, and when I mouse over my mask, it really didn't, aside from the part where I purposefully went into the cactus, it stayed within that flower. So this adjustment is truly just to that flower without having a teeny tiny brush trying to find all those edges. It truly stayed within that flower using the auto mask.
Would that work like on hair?
Yes.
Okay.
That would work on hair too. So if you're trying to maybe brighten hair or do dodging and burning on hair and stuff like that, anything within that realm of color, it will only recognize whatever's in the crosshair and do similar colors surrounding it.
Yeah.
Yep. So it will work for just about anything. I wonder if it would work with this. Like if I wanted to increase the exposure of just this. Back here. See, it's being really particular right now because of all the variations of green. So it's going to take a little bit more brushing. But if I only wanted these certain petals, not all of them, just these certain ones, it's not going over onto the surrounding petals like it would with it turned off. So it's really good about recognizing those areas. You just have to watch where the crosshair is. That's not too bad, actually. That's pretty good. You can see in the shadow area, that's where it falls off just a little bit, like right here. But if you think about the adjustment you're doing, it makes sense not to touch the shadows. So it's not that bad. So I could do it right here if I wanted to and see how it's just picking the edge. It's not picking up the green at all. It's limiting it just to that part. If I have a bigger brush, that's, whoops. Dang. I didn't mean to go out of it. There you go. So it really isn't going on to the green at all unless I move my mouse over to that area, then it will. Okay, obviously I don't want it on this. Take it off, take it off. Why is it not? Oh, I accidentally clicked new. Somewhere along the line, I accidentally clicked a new one. And if you ever don't like an adjustment you've done, highlight it to make it active, hit the delete key, and it goes away. It's a beautiful thing. The little poof of a cloud, too, because we need cool animations. Go back to this one. This is way too bright. I'm going to hit new. The only trick, and I do this all the time, when you're using the adjustment brush, if you go to do a new, like I want to brush more saturation on the cactus itself, I tend to move my sliders first and then do it. And the problem usually is if you have a pinpoint already, it adjusts that one. So you have to get into the habit of hitting new and then making your adjustments to the slider here, because otherwise it adjusts the current one. Not that you can't undo, it's just annoying. Okay. And I like the auto mask in this case too, because now it's truly just doing the cactus. It's not affecting the other things here. Don't really want to increase, but let's crank that saturation a bit. And sometimes to do a color effect with the adjustment brush, you're playing with the white balance to fake a different white balance for it, and it in turn does the hue of the image. So that's the basics of the adjustment brush. Now we can dodge burn, and that would be just having a brush and then brushing in a higher exposure, highlights, whites, brushing those areas. If I want to, let's see, is this one? Let's see if I can get, like this image. This image is kind of, it needs a whole lot of help here. In my basic tab, I don't want to do too much here. I can do some. I don't want to get rid of the contrast. But the problem I have is that it's still pretty dark in here, and I might want to do my dodging and burning for this one. So I could go into my adjustment brush. I can dodge this area to lighten it. I could even burn the areas here where it's a lot more of a highlight, just to bring out more detail in this particular image. So I'm going to, wow, that's not even in focus completely. I'm going to go to my adjustment brush. I'm going to hit the K. I'm going to choose whatever settings I want. And in this case, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the exposure, probably the shadows a little bit. I'm going to increase the exposure just to play with it. I'm going to increase the contrast because I think I'm going to have to. Take this down. Saturation, I'm going to go back. But I'm going to increase the shadows too. I'll just start there and see what that does. I'm going to leave my auto mask on. I have that checkbox on simply because I don't want the sky to be affected. I only want this statue, this artwork, and then just start brushing over the pieces. This is where auto mask is awesome. I'm going to try not go into the sky here. And I just want to do this part of it here. Kind of use that as my starting point. So the exposure, not too bad. I think I need a little bit more contrast added in there though. Shadows aren't the worst. I still want it to be contrasty. I just want to be able to see some of this detail. So I might brush over some of these areas too. just because I want to see some of that detail. And I could be a little bit more particular than what I just did, where instead of just brushing over this whole area, I could have been intentionally selecting just the dark shadow side and leave the highlight side. Obviously, I'd be spending more time at this point. Wow, that's really out of focus. I'd be spending a little bit more time at this point just selecting these shadow areas, but leaving the highlights. So I could choose to do that, and that would be fine. You can see, looking at the mask, it did omit some of the highlight areas because I didn't brush over all those highlight areas. So some of those weren't even touched, but I know there were some spots where I did. Let me go back to fit here. I know where there were a huge handful of spots where I did brush over the highlights. So I could erase those out, or this is essentially my dodging. I could now get a new pin. I could click new. I could reset these all back to 0 by holding my reset and clicking. And then in the highlight stuff, I could take the exposure down a little bit, take the highlights down, maybe the white point, I'm not quite sure yet. And then I can brush over that area where the highlight is just a little bit too much. And I might have to zoom in to do part of this. This is great if you have a window where the light's coming through the window and it blew it out a little bit, where it's just a little bit too much and it's overkill, that you want to take it down a little bit, not as much intensity, or a spot where it's completely blown out and no matter what you do, you can't fix it without it affecting the rest of the image. This is great for something like that, but it's just a way to even out some of those areas. I could do all of it, but so I can turn that on and off and see the difference. So I've brought back a chunk of the detail. I've still lost a little bit of contrast, so I'll have to fix that, but at least this image now is usable, minus the fact that it's not totally in focus. Add a bit more contrast, add a bit of clarity. There we go. So that's a huge difference, and the adjustment brush was what I needed for that because of the drastic difference in the shadows and the highlight because of the sun. That's one way to edit. I talked about the auto mask. Don't need to do too much with that. Oh, let me go back in here. For those of you that like to, I found it in the book, for those of you that like to see your mask when you're using a brush like this, there is a checkbox down here in this middle bar. It says show selected mask overlay. If you check that, whenever you have a pin selected, it will show you, sometimes it's hard to find your pins, it will show you the mask at all times. So you can use that to keep it on when you're brushing, if it's easier for you visually to see what you're doing, or after the fact, you just like to have it on to see, to go back and erase and that kind of stuff. I like to have this on when I'm erasing, more so than just mousing over it. So that little checkbox will do it. Otherwise, if you remember this one, this I always forget, is O for overlay. It's on 199 in the book if you need it, but that is the quick key to turn this on and off. So if you'd rather just hit that to toggle back and forth, you could do that. That's an easy enough way to do it. You just have to remember the O. I always forget it. I usually just use this checkbox here. He has a section in chapter 5 where he talks about 5 other things to know about the adjustment brush. It's a nice little section. It's just going through certain settings to be able to do things that you want to do, customize the adjustment brush a little bit. So there's a disclosure triangle next to the effects, which has all your sliders. So if you don't need that or you find it's in your way, you can turn that off if you want. Honestly, I don't know why you'd want to, because that's like the life of the adjustment brush. Closing that to me seems a little bit odd, but it's obviously there for a reason. But what this does is this essentially is the amount of how that effect is applied. Think of this as like an opacity. I wish it was just here, because you forget that it's there all the time. When it's open, here's all the sliders. When it's closed, this is pretty much, here's the opacity of how this is going to be applied to your image. Think of it that way. Yeah, this really does drive me nuts that it's hiding in here. So you may want to write down page 199, not just because it has that quick key, but because it has that tip of closing that disclosure triangle to get the amount slider. Now it does it overall to everything. It's not just, I said that backwards, I'm sorry. It does it overall to that particular pin. So if I have the pin selected where I did the burning, and I wanted that to be just a little bit less or a little bit more overall, I can use that amount slider, and it will act independently of the one I did for the highlights. So each pin is just a little bit, I have the amount slider for each one. It's not an overall for all the pins. It's each pin individually, and essentially think of it as like an opacity of that adjustment applied over the top of the image, if it's easier to understand it that way. But yes, you do have to have this closed, not only to hide the sliders, but to get that amount slider. Again, another thing, I really, really wish it was just right here, because that would be easier to have the amount slider overall. I went through the preview. And then the density. Yeah, I'll talk about that one. When you have the auto mask checked, below the auto mask is the density slider, and that pertains to the auto mask. So the density slider is just essentially when you're painting the mask, you can change how dense that brush is when it's finding the edges. Honestly, he even says right in here, don't ever change it from the default setting of 100. So all the density does is just how it recognizes some of those edges. But if you want that to flow as nice and smooth as it does when you have the auto mask enabled, just don't change it past 100. Leave it. Always leave it. Pretend it's not even there or an option to change, because I really don't see you guys changing that option at all. To go through anything else with the adjustment brush, I think really is just you guys playing with it. He has a section in there that talks about fixing white balance and stuff like that, but really just realize all the sliders that are there and think creatively about how you can use them. You might have an image where it's 2 different color situations. I don't know that I necessarily have one here. I might, now that I say that. If you have, let's say you are indoors and you're taking a picture and you capture some of the light outdoors, but you're white balanced to the inside of the building. The outside might be blue, the inside might be yellow. And so to adjust the white balance of that image, you are getting 2 different colors overall. I'm trying to see if I have one that might be a better example of it. Ooh, I just saw it. So this could be an example of one. Now, I have so much work to do on this one. This one needs to be straightened a bit. It's got some distortion. It needs help. Profile, Canon 75. I need some transform tools here. Rotate. It just needs some help. Again, we're going to talk about all this, but it's going to bother me if I don't fix this. It's a little bit better. See if I can fix this. All right, we're going to go with that. So in this particular image, I have, this is Alcatraz, so this is the outside of one of the jail cells, and it has the ambient light coming in from the skylight in the ceiling. So it has daylight coming in, but then the inside of the cell has the fluorescent light or whatever color light they have in there. So the cell itself is yellow, the outside is blue, and I would like for those to match so that they're the same white balance. Obviously, I can't use the basic panel because it's going to change everything as a whole. So I have a little bit of an issue there. So what I need to do for this particular image is decide which white balance, which part of this do I want to use, which light should I white balance from. And knowing that I have to use the adjustment brush to fix the other part of it, what I need to do is, I think it's going to be easier to use the outside here. And then white balance to the inside of the cell, because to brush in between every one of these bars is going to be kind of a pain. So I'm going to choose to white balance the light on the inside of the cell. So I'm going to use my white balance tool. I know this wall is supposed to be white. I'm going to click on that to be white so that the inside is white balanced, though the outside looks horrendous. I'm going to fix it a little bit. I'm now going to use my adjustment brush, the K tool, and I'm going to brush to the outside of it for just my white balance. So I'm going to reset by Option or Alt clicking the reset button. This is too blue. I know I'm going to have to warm it up a bit, so I'm just going to play with my temperature. I'm going to leave my auto mask on because this will help not have to brush every bar of the jail cell. And now I'm just going to brush here in this part of my image overall. Now I'm going to have to play with this a little bit, but if I can attempt to do this. Okay, this is way harder than I thought it was going to be. So let's just pretend I went down all the bars, because I don't have enough time to do that. But now my mask, if I mouse over it here, I can see I've kind of done a huge chunk of it right there. So now I have a much closer white balance. I mean, everything is looking a little bit more uniform now. This is going to be the best way to try and fix that. I might even make this a little bit more yellow. Green. Let's go this direction. So that's one way to choose a white balance and then match the other part of the image and try and match that white balance across the board. So the adjustment brush is awesome for that. Obviously I have to do these bars yet, but you can see how it affects the image overall, especially at the top. So that's one way to use the adjustment brush. Now, I didn't get through the retouching because I'm realizing what time it is already. There is the retouching of portraits and using the retouch tool. We will come back and do things with that, but on your own, if you wanted to go through, this is going to help you with part of some of the things that you're going to be working on over the next few weeks. Starting on page 202 in chapter 5 through the end of the chapter, they talk about these other tools here. So we have the radial tool, which is second from the right. And then we have the gradient tool, or the graduated filter, sorry. The graduated filter tool, which is the one in the middle. There's also the retouch tool. Now that part I'll go through a little bit more in class, but that's where that starts, is the retouching portraits using Lightroom. But that through the end of the chapter, I'd like for you just to kind of follow along or read through to understand what he's doing. Again, we'll go through that retouching stuff as a group, but you might want that for what you're working on for your assignment. So I left this assignment very open-ended, if I can get Blackboard to get out of the gradebook. I left this assignment very open-ended, where I just want you to play around in the develop module and figure out what works best for images, what you like using for editing. So all I want you to do, whoops, this is edit in local. What? This is not the one that should be showing up for you guys. The other assignment should be showing up. Okay, this is just fine. So what I want you to do is, using chapters 4 and 5, we're combining editing as a whole and editing locally. I want you to import a handful of images. You can use either a new catalog or just import into an existing. If you import into an existing, simply export that this assignment as a new catalog. Go through, do any rating, picking. Okay, this is bothering me because this is not the one I had selected for you guys. I must not have updated the link. I'm going to switch the links. They're pretty much the same thing, it's just that this one's a little bit pickier. I want you guys to have a little bit more freedom with what you're doing. This is annoying that it did this. It is, should be this one. There you go. This is the one I thought I shared with you. Okay, I'm going to switch this really quick. Pretend you didn't see the other one, because I want you guys to do this one. There we go. This is the one I want you guys to do. I want you to select several photos to edit and really just focus on editing and how you edit and really improving it overall, but playing in Lightroom to get the image exactly as you want it. You really only need to choose 5 images for this assignment, because I really want you to focus on each image and really be picky about how you adjust those images. So I'm really leaving it wide open. The only thing you have to do is the 5 images you choose, put them into a new collection, just those 5 images, so that you can then select that collection and export only those 5. So whether it's a new catalog or not, it doesn't matter to me, because you will just turn in those 5 as its own collection. So you can put them in their own collection. Honestly, you can call them whatever you want. And then I just want you to improve the photos using local adjustments, which is the adjustment brushes, or overall adjustments, or a combination of both. You need to do local adjustments on all of these images. If you want to do global adjustments in addition to that, that's totally up to you. But then you will simply, in the caption field, you will simply just put what you did locally. So when you use the adjustment brush, or when you go through the rest of the chapter for the radial filter or the graduated filter, just simply put in the caption field, which is in the library module under the metadata tab. Here's the caption field. Just simply type, if I use the adjustment brush, I used it to fix white balance of bars on the jail cell. Just simply type what you use the adjustment brush for. I don't need to know I increased the saturation 50 points. I don't need that. Just simply say I use the adjustment brush to do this. That's it. So for those 5 images in the caption field, make sure to type that, and then you will then export the catalog with just those 5 images, or the collection as a new catalog with those 5 images, and then submit that next week. And that's it. So it's wide open to what you want to do, because I want you to pick your images and make it work for those. that make sense? So maybe? Okay. I took too long. I hope no one has an 11:30 class. If you do, I will write you a note. No, I'm kidding. And give you a hall pass. But Flex Lab is in here now for the next few hours, so feel free to sit in here and work if you want to, if you need help on anything, whatever you need. But otherwise, 5 images for next week is the goal. And we will keep moving through those chapters.